Hi, my name is Robin Riley. I first became acquainted with Scope Ministries back in 1976. I was sitting in my pastor's office in Enid, Oklahoma, and he suggested that my husband James and I go for marriage counseling. So for weeks we would drive from Enid to Oklahoma City and meet with a counselor. After about 8 weeks, he moved back into the house. He was out of the doghouse, and he decided he was fixed and quit going. But I continued on. I knew we needed more help than that. We were living in an alcoholic family, and I was a raging codependent. The heart change that occurred to me after going to those early counseling sessions were twofold. First, I was taught that God was to come first in my life. My spouse was to be second, and my children were to be third, and everyone else came after that. If you have those priorities out of line, your life will not be good. Needless to say, I had probably myself in first place, and my kids came second, and James was so far down on the pole. So I was asked to begin to ask God to fill me up with unconditional love for my husband and be able to see him the way that God saw him. I tried my best to do that during the 17 years of an alcoholic marriage and my codependency. Another thing that I took to heart was that the majority of people view God the same way that they view the authority figure in their life. So if you had a father that was cruel or absent, that's how you felt God was. In my case, I was very blessed to have two parents that were strong Christians, and they loved us unconditionally and were good disciplinarians. But no parent is perfect, and I really felt like God was a little too busy for me at times, especially the small things in my life. In 1985, we had an intervention on my husband, James. A few minutes into the intervention, it was our daughter's turn to confront her daddy on his behavior, and all she could do was to crawl up into his lap and cry and say, "Daddy, I love you. I don't want you to die. I want you to get some help." The intervention was over, and off he went to treatment. He came back a changed man. He became a Christian, and a year later he started his own ministry, Jim Riley Outreach. But it wasn't a few years before Marcy, our daughter, got into a rebellion of her own. And then in 1989, our son Blake was killed in a tragic accident at the age of 20. The pain from his death was unbearable. A few months after Blake's death, I decided to join James in the outreach and help him. I worked with the women, he worked with the men, and it wasn't long before I realized I wanted more meat to give to the women that I counseled with. And I heard that Scope Ministries had biblical counseling classes, so I took each one and became a certified biblical counselor. During this process, I worked through a lot of the grief I felt with Blake and the dysfunction in our family. I identified my wrong beliefs and replaced them with God's truth. The overwhelming feelings and ruts of bad behavior went away, and I was set free. As part of Jim Riley Outreach, James and I have held a Tuesday night support group for over 30 years. Again, I host the women, and he hosts the men. I have taught Scope's workbook, Be Transformed, to at least a dozen different group of women that have come through the doors of my house. I also went to Maud, Oklahoma, to an all-men's treatment center and taught Be Transformed to dozens of men down there. And then they opened up a women's treatment center in Purcell, and I went over there and taught Be Transformed. One of those women who sat in my Tuesday night support group was Sandra Pickard. Sandra came in to my group as a skeptic, determined to find a fix for her alcoholic husband. After taking Be Transformed, God gave Sandra a new heart, and she went out of my group and enrolled in Scope's biblical counseling courses. The rest is your history. Throughout life, God keeps ministering to me by bringing just the right people into my life to pray for me and to encourage me and to teach me. The teachings of Scope Ministry keep whispering in my ear with each joy and obstacle that I face. For the last year, I've been dealing with metastatic melanoma. God has healed me every step of the way, and I think He's going to continue to do that. So many times when my feelings overwhelm me, I use Scope's little tool, the acrostic READ, R-E-E-D. The R stands for recognize. Just recognize what the feeling is that I'm having. E is express it to God. The second E is to evaluate it. Am I believing in the old lie again? And D, if I am, decide to replace that lie with God's truth from His Word. This little tool has kept me balanced through the many ups and downs of my life. God has used Scope Ministries International to radically change my belief, which have radically changed my thoughts, which have changed my behavior, and finally have changed my emotions. I have been honored to carry Scope's message to hundreds of women over the years as I've tried to impart the life of Christ by giving them God's unconditional love. I want to thank my Heavenly Father for being my Jehovah Rapha, the God who heals. He's healed me in every circumstance of my life. I want to thank Scope Ministries International to their selfless, dedicated counselors who boldly speak God's truth and are not budged by the fluctuating morals of our society. And I want to thank you for being here and for listening. Thank you.